Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. Today I've got one of my quick thoughts videos. It's an opinion piece about camera technology and basically, have we reached the point of diminished returns? I'll explain this concept and what I mean about it, and we'll talk about these camera bodies that are coming out in 2024 and beyond, and are they really going to make a difference? Right after this. I've told you in the past, I'm a thinker. So when I'm out gardening or in the shower, I kind of get these thoughts in my head. And I did a spoofy video on Instagram, one of these quick things. And it was taking a light jab at Canon and their release of their flagship model. And the fact that it was 24 megapixels. And believe me, I know some of this is fun. You know, I take a little shot at Canon. I'm a Nikon shooter. And I know it's a sports camera. You don't have to go through all the thing. I know it's got some other technology in it, but you know, flagship camera, 24 megapixels, it's 2024. Seemed a little light. By the way, I know some of my friends who are gearheads and they buy the latest and greatest camera. And when this new series came out, they came out with two models, but when this new line came out, they were kind of like, yeah, I think I'm going to sit this one out. And I was surprised because these guys buy every new release. And it made me think a little bit as I was taking this little jab at Canon's 24 megapixel flagship. It made me think a little bit about where we're at as technology has evolved. And my friends are now saying, oh, I'm gonna ride this one. I'm not gonna bother buying this body. Have we reached the point of diminished return? So this concept of these changes or these progressions in camera bodies, have we gotten to the point where the next generations aren't actually that much better than the generation before? Now, let me just kind of real quickly go through this concept. So we go from film cameras, right? And when they first come out, they're pretty bad. It's almost as bad as like a drawing of a person, right? You look at the first film cameras, big wet plates or whatever they were, they're pretty bad, but they capture a thing. And then you get to the 70s and 80s and film cameras are looking pretty good, right? They're able to do a lot. And then you make this giant leap from film to digital, and it starts off pretty poor, but each generation gets significantly better than the generation before, right? First generation comes out, it's like a megapixel, and next generation's 4 megapixels, and then it's 12, and then it's 24. So resolution keeps building and building, and technology is getting better. And then we get into like, I don't know, the 2018 to 2020, and DSLRs, I should make that point, not just digital, but DSLRs are getting to kind of like the end of their life. And when you notice the generations, we started to get some changes. So I went from like a D7000, a Nikon shooter, to a D500. It was a really nice change in crop sensors. And you went from like a D700 full frame to a D850. And you were really getting a nice camera. And there were pretty good improvements, but not like the improvements from the first to second and third generations. I mean, these are quantum leaps in digital. And then we move into mirrorless. And when we get into mirrorless, we're already carrying over a lot of that technology from DSLRs. We're just changing the mechanics of the way it all works. And it can do some things that DSLRs can't. So frame rates go up, but resolution doesn't really change that much. And we've gotten out of that first generation. A lot of that was about autofocus. Like how do we get better autofocus from our first generation cameras into our second? Now we're pretty good with autofocus. You look at the new Sonys and Canons and the Nikon, the Z9 flagship that I own. Autofocus is pretty good. So as the next generation comes out, and again, Canon releases their newest generation, and you look at the changes and you say, is it really worth it? Am I getting that much more value out of this new body? Sure, it's got some improvements. And I thought, where do we go? Like, what more do you want from a camera? The thing now, 30 frames a second in raw footage, that's pretty significant. Could you get 60 or 120? Sure. If you're a sports shooter, maybe those applications are like, yes, I need that. But I'm getting 120 frames of JPEG right now out of a Z9. What more do I need? What more resolution do I need? Well, I'm at the point where if I get more resolution, my lenses can't resolve to the resolution. So there's really no point. My glass isn't good enough as a wildlife photographer using larger lenses. My glass probably isn't good enough to make the more resolution even worth it. Now, this isn't a technical video, so I know somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong about something. That's okay. It happens every time I try to mention anything technical. This is more of a philosophical premise. What more do I need from megapixels? Sony's up to 60. Do I need more than that? And a full frame camera, now medium format might be different, et cetera, but speed, frame rate, am I maxed out, almost maxed out on frame rate? Am I almost maxed out on resolution? Autofocus, could it be a little better? Sure. Maybe there's some tweaks to things like dynamic range. I don't know if we've reached the point that dynamic range is tapped out, but probably getting pretty close with modern technology and sensors that we're not going to get a whole lot more dynamic range. Maybe better noise performance or ISO performance so that the images look cleaner coming out. But here's where I think we're seeing it. And you saw it with Canon's release. If I'm not wrong, and I'm not a Canon expert, so I didn't, get one in my hands and shoot it and do all these things. But it seems like now what we're introducing is the things that we do in software, in post-processing, we're given some options to do. So the camera is doing noise reduction, but it's doing that not at the sensor level. It's doing that as an output. So it's processing the image for you a little bit better. We may see more of that type of technology, upsizing. So taking smaller images and making them bigger, but that's not a physical thing. That is a computer process. That's a software thing. That's something we can do in post-processing, but the camera's just going to do it for us. So I think what we're seeing now is some of these convenience type things. Let's take some of the post-processing work and add it into a camera. A lot of people aren't even going to use that. So for me, even if my camera had that, I like to post-process. I like to look at my images and cull them and, go through that. I shouldn't say cull them because that could be a chore, but you know what I mean. So at the end of the day, what more do I want from a camera? Here's where I think there will be some advancements. So for still photography, I think we are really close to that point where there's not a whole lot left. There's this idea of this arc, right? In the beginning, you make these big jumps, but as time goes past, it's incremental increases. You don't really get much more, which means the photographer is probably a lot more important than the gear. So in other words, the results now, the camera's not going to make that much of a difference. It's not going to do a whole lot more for us. And some people could argue that more frame rates gives you better chances for great images. So when we were getting more frame rates out of cameras, maybe it made you a better photographer. But a lot of people agree that the photographer is always going to be the most important thing. I share that philosophy. But that gear now isn't going to help me that much more. So maybe even more time needs to be spent on my work and my field work than the camera. But I just think we're at that point. Yeah, next generation, I got a Z9 flagship. Maybe next year they come out with a Z9 II. What more is that thing going to do for me to make me a better photographer? I can't think of anything it's going to do as a still photographer. Now, here's where I think we might see some jumps. We are continuing to see improvements in the performance of processors. So they get faster and faster and faster. And that's not something that diminishes a lot over time. It kind of consistently improves over time. So a processor speed will double on a pretty regular basis. So we will probably continue to see processors get smaller and faster at the same time, which means camera manufacturers can add more than one processor if they need because they're smaller. They just need to deal with some of the other issues like the heat that they generate. So we almost are making these cameras now just computers, which they've been for a while. So when we get more processing speed, we can continue frame rate, but to me, I think we're pretty much tapped out on frame rate for what I need. Even as a wildlife photographer, I don't really ever use more than 20 frames per second. But for video, everything gets different. And here's where I think the future improvements will really come, where you'll really see oh, that makes a difference to me. So if I want to go from a 4K resolution shooter to an 8K resolution videographer, I can do that more easily and have a lot more options. For the past, up to this point, if your camera even had 8K, you were probably limited in the number of frames that it could produce because the files are so massive. So you're taking big files and you're making 30 frames per second of these big files. But if I had faster processing, I could make 60 frames per second, maybe even 120. And down the road, we'll be shooting, I'm sure, 8K at 240 frames. And that is a massive amount of data to move back and forth. And you might say, well, we don't watch 240K. If you know anything about video resolution, 24K is all you need to make a fluid looking video. Maybe it gets a little better at 30. Some people use 60, but you don't need more than that. What it gives you the ability to do is shoot slow motion. So you can shoot the 240, slow it down to 24, and it's 10 times slower in a slow motion video. So you could shoot a lot of slow motion at 8K. Right now, I can't think of many cameras that I don't know what the best resolution is. Somebody will tell me down in the comments. But for an 8K video, what's the highest frames for a normal photography camera? I'm not talking about a specialized video equipment. So what I think we're going to see is an evolution of cameras, and the improvements that are still out there are probably more on the video side than the still photography side. But the point of this Quick Thoughts video is, are we, for right now, does it make sense to spend more money on a body once you've gotten to a certain point and you've achieved that flagship status of whatever your brand loyalty lies? Once you achieve that, does the next generation, does it matter? If you got money to burn, sure, go ahead and do it. But for most people, value conscious, or just, does it make sense? And for me, I honestly, I don't know what I need more from a camera. Maybe if I was being super picky, maybe a little bit better autofocus would be nice for any application for a wildlife photographer. The ability to really acquire the eye every time consistently and nail it. I think you may see some improvements in autofocus in the next generations. But anyway, the point of this video is just to say, what do you think? Are we getting to that point where we are at diminished returns, where the next generations aren't really giving us that much more than the previous generations? Does it make sense to constantly upgrade, especially for still photography? And do you see that difference where I'm talking about maybe the videography is going to be where the jumps come in? Let me know down in the comments. Just a Quick Thoughts video today. I thought maybe you'd like to hear one of these. Haven't done it in a while. I've got a few more because when I thought about this idea around that Canon flagship, a couple other concepts came out of that for me. So I've got a few more of these Quick Thoughts video. By the way, I didn't realize I put on the camo today. I was out in the yard with the camo. I thought I'd do a Quick Thoughts video and record it for you. But hey, I'm a wildlife guy. So here you get digital camo on your Quick Thoughts video today. If you're not subscribed to the channel, just remember I have different playlists. So if you like the Quick Thoughts videos, I've got playlists that go back in time for that. I do reviews, do some educational pieces as well. So check out the playlists. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get all of the content. Hit the bell for notifications, let you know when I have a new video out. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.